Ha! Snipes here, and I know that effectively every single one of these weekly Sandstorm videos are regarding updates, or else it would be controversy. However, with virtually nothing to report on right now, I can easily go for taking a break from the news and talking about something that to me has been rather lackluster and disappointing since day one of owning Sandstorm.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
You've seen the thumbnail, you've read the title, and you may not agree, but hear me out. You're watching This Week in Sandstorm. Now, before we get all worked up, I'm gonna give a big preface to the entirety of the point I'm about to try and make in this video. I don't really think push is necessarily always bad. It's just easily the worst of all of them.
Why you bullying me?
But this really starts with a story. No, I actively avoid playing push because, well, I hate it. But I was browsing YouTube with nothing to do and I came across a stream. MGE Gibbs was online and in the game. Now, if you are either new to Sandstorm or been living under a rock in fear of being killed by Cleric, you may not know that Gibbs is effectively the only YouTuber primarily creating content on Sandstorm that's bigger than me. Naturally, I had to kill him. The only issue was, he was in push, which I haven't played in probably a year now. But I'll gladly put up with getting sniped in spawn camps so long as I can kill my mortal enemy and steal his subscribers. And after a little bit of Q spamming, we eventually ended up in the match after joining and leaving about a dozen different games.
Finally, a worthy opponent. Our battle will be legendary.
Now, long story short, I only ever got one shot at taking him out, and because I was in the stupid out of bounds zone all of a sudden, I couldn't kill him, and he didn't manage to finish me off, so I guess it's Gibbs 0, Snipes 0 for now, but that's not really the point here. The point is, after a good handful of games, I was reminded of just how much fun I wasn't gonna have playing this. Like, sometimes it was just genuinely not only frustrating, but degrading with having to put up with how poorly it's designed despite being the big deal that it is within WI. So then and there, I didn't know when, but I didn't know that I was gonna have to talk about it, because really, if this is the way the game is meant to be played, I genuinely dislike it, perhaps more than anything else in Sandstorm. Okay, maybe not anything else, but the point still stands. Allow me to elaborate. For the uninitiated, the PvE only fans, or else the console owners who can't play this game yet,
it is what it is.
Push is the poster boy game mode of Insurgency Sandstorm, widely advertised and most maintenance by the developers themselves. The majority of, if not effectively all of their time developing PvP basically goes into this one. It is almost definitely what everything is balanced around. It is obviously the rule set which the creators want to define the game. The reality is that push is meant to be the simulation for ground combat in the Middle East, team coordination, fire support, infantry, light vehicle warfare. Overall, it's the definitive interpretation of how this game really plays. Top of the list when you open up the player versus player menu, and if I had to guess, the most trafficked because of this. And to be honest, when it works, it really works. It's fun, exciting, high stakes, and nail-biting all the way to blowing up the final cache when you're sitting on a good lobby. But the sad reality is, in the majority of the games I play, I end up feeling really worn out and frustrated with the several glaring issues and insufficiencies it suffers from. For consistency's sake, I'll make it three reasons why push is my least favorite mode. First, number one, and perhaps most obvious, especially the people who've been playing for a significant amount of time, the player balance is horrific. Not just in push, however, in this mode of all of them, it shows the most. Now, Insurgency has never had a particularly sizable player base, and I understand that when there are so few players online at any given time, generally 2,000 to 3,000, it may be difficult to always make sure that someone is playing against their own level. But you can't tell me that they couldn't be doing a way better job at making sure that all the level 1000s can't just stack into one team, leaving a bunch of bronze badges with 2-digit numbers on the lower side having to deal with an op 4 of players who've been doing this since before skirmish wasn't just a temporary mode.
Perfectly balanced.
as all things should be.
Sadly, most push games look like one team, i.e. the good team, capturing every single objective with little to no contest and completely wiping the floor with the others, the bad team, all the way from point A to the supply cache. And as if that wasn't enough, without rebalancing their roster to ensure a more fair next game, Insurgency decides that one round of that wasn't enough.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
So the winners get to show you how defense is done and utterly shut your team out and hunt you all down rapidly looking for kills while all you want to do is score an objective at any time at all. Maybe even, God forbid, break even.
Why you bully me?
It's too often a vicious cycle, and honestly, even the next games don't do a good job at reorganizing people into a more playable roster after the first gets absolutely obliterated. If there was only a tangible elo system which actually accurately depicted the skill level of every player, except wait, they removed competitive, so you can forget about any investment into some form of discernible skill system, and whatever they're using now certainly isn't cutting it, and it really shows every day you get on. This would be reason enough for plenty of people, especially those not wanting to or unable to invest the time to get better, to look for another mode, if not another game entirely. But as if that wasn't enough, we have another 2 issues to go. So secondly, we can talk about the faction imbalance, more specifically economy issues. The reality is that while they've done a very good job at making 2 sides with entirely different arsenals line up fairly well in terms of usage and balance, it's clear that unfortunately insurgents get to have the better gear. And you may say no, that's not the case. The majority of the security guns are generally better, and yeah, I would agree, but good luck affording them. The reason I say insurgency loadouts tend to be stronger is simply because everything's cheaper. Free secondaries, free gas masks, optic with functional to excellent magnifications for singular credits.
It's free real estate.
The reality is, as a terrorist, you can field way more things on your things. In one match as a security demolition man, I struggled to have a decent primary built off the M16, which is the cheapest gun available, and even then, plus proper carriers, armor, and again the cheapest secondary, I could only barely afford the AT-4, the cheapest rocket launcher. Meanwhile, Insurgent Demo Man gets a heavy carrier, top tier RPG-7, meaning double the missiles, as well as grenade launcher and scope on the AK. At the end of the day, as US or NATO or whatever, I have to sacrifice a basic optic or extended magazine so I can afford a vital class-specific utility, and it just sucks. And while this tends to get balanced out by the fact that security's fire support itself is better than the insurgents by leagues, who exactly gets to utilize that? The commander and kind of the observer, though at the end of the day it's just one guy running around pointing where he wants the A-10 to nuke and a radio guy who has to follow him, and everyone else has to pray he's doing a good job, because if he isn't, then it's a really good chance you're about to get bodied by people who have 2 times the gear that you do. And in many games where it's just common for neither side to use a commander or fire support at all, because let's face it, sometimes it's more fun to do the shooting yourself, security just has the disadvantage. Not to mention the small factor of realism that would see a security force funded by one, if not a conglomerate of many large countries, being completely outmatched in terms of gear by an insurgent team wearing Crocs and socks.
The secret ingredient is crime.
It's a funky system, and while not totally unbalanced, again, it just isn't fun half the time if you're a loadout nerd like myself. Which brings us to the final and most damning point, because no matter what skill level or knowledge you're at, no matter what position you have about push, you can't deny that many, if not the majority of maps are poorly engineered and conducive of camping and BS in general. I get that getting sniped from Oblivion because you were running out into the open is one thing, but there's only so many times you can be hugging a wall or even well inside cover and get insta-killed from somewhere you don't know and someone you'll never find and certainly didn't see before you just quit. The most infuriating offender, however, would be literally having just spawned and you and your friends getting wiped out by some drooling no skill using a sniper, or more gross and commonly an MG. And before you finish writing that comment about how you're supposed to use smoke, I don't feel like it was intended for us to literally have to pop canisters the minute we spawn and before we can leave. The fact that anyone is able to kill you within 10 seconds of returning to the match after waiting so long is already ridiculous and demeaning. It doesn't help that unless you're the most experienced player with an ultra high sense of map knowledge, which is by the way changing between modes, you probably won't know how to get an equally stupid hiding place because of how illogically placed the out of bounds sections are. Further yet, many of those dead zones that you aren't allowed to enter effectively remove any hope of flanking countless enemy positions or even entire objectives. No, you can't strategize an effective pincer maneuver with your friends. You're gonna run straight at the enemy and get wiped, and you're gonna have to like it. And let's consider the realism that this game is known for just a second again. So in what world where I am standing directly behind an enemy technical with the ability to take it out would my command center call me a dumbass and tell me to run back to the rest of the team through the enemy, much less me being magically not able to fire my weapon anymore? Not to mention you can be standing in a perfectly safe area one moment and without any warning whatsoever be completely at the mercy of the enemy team the next. So yeah, everything from the terrible sniper fest maps, hilariously stacked rosters, and disappointing customization limitations really just solidify a concrete reputation for Push being the most poorly designed mode for really any game I've played, let alone the one that the devs balance and maintenance their entire game around. Sure, the matchmaking can be tricky to fix, but at least modes like Domination and Firefight have smaller teams that rotate around between games and don't drag on for half an hour of getting gangbanged constantly. Moreover, Domination doesn't have a single place your enemy can go that you can't, and everyone is given access to the same equipment, all of the equipment, for the same price, making for a far more fun, faster paced, but still tactical supplement to an abhorrent mess that is Push. And I won't pretend that every mode doesn't have problems, but it just feels like all of the game's worst come down on what happens to also be the biggest, not to mention that NWI has in the past actively sought to suppress player counts in other modes with differentiating the XP rewards as well as literally removing entire core game modes despite the community having voted for them to stay. Read Skirmish. But I can't ignore that gathered from what I've seen more recently, it definitely seems like this and the game as a whole is getting better. They've dropped 3 massive updates in a very short time frame, all of which did in the long run improve the game to some significant degree, and with the bugs getting ironed out fairly well and them having listened to our feedback on the skins, I like to think maybe soon they'll make some changes that make everyone happy, because I know I'm not the only person who avoids Push for all the reasons listed above. At the end of the day, I can't knock Push too hard. It is a lot of fun if you know how to play it right. The learning curve is steep and it's not the most welcoming or intuitive, especially for all the new players, but it could be a lot worse. In fact, it seems to be a little better from when I started playing a couple days ago. I can see why so many people drop into this specific fray, and it will always have merits, but hopefully it gets better for everyone to have a little less hair-tugging, eye-twitching experiences. Maybe you agree with me, or maybe you don't, and no matter what, it's okay so long as we have a discussion about it in the comments down below. I am curious to hear more about thoughts on it in general. Is this a hot take? I guess I'll find out soon enough. But until next time, I'm Snipes, and this has been your week in Sandstorm. I'll see you out there.